My name is Brenda Louise. I'm 28 years old, and I grew up in the rolling vineyards of Willow Ridge, California, a place famous for its golden sunsets, crisp air, and the promise that love could be bottled like wine. But some promises aren't meant to be kept. I met Gavin Hartwell under the grapevines when I was 22. He was the vineyard manager, tall, dark-haired, with eyes that reflected the emerald rose at dawn. We fell in love walking through the vines, dreaming of our future drizzle with picnic baskets and laughter. I thought I was living in a fairy tale. At T26, he proposed beneath the oak in our vineyard, ring-plated in silver. I said yes with all my heart. We set the wedding for Christmas Eve, at the estate chapel, nestled among vines dusted in frost. I planned the evening, candlelit aisle, red velvet dress, hymns echoing through the wooden beams. I was going to marry my best friend, but the night before the wedding, Gavin confessed he couldn't marry me. Not because he didn't love me, he claimed, but because his soul belonged to someone else, my own Aunt Eleanor, my mother's younger sister. The walls seemed to shatter around me. My aunt, my mother's sister, the woman I trusted, they were together for months behind my back. My world unraveled in the span of a confession. Christmas Eve arrived. I sat in the pew, white dress crumpled in my arms, tears freezing on my cheeks. Gavin stood at the altar, eyes hollow. My aunt walked down, arm linked with his, dressed in my bouquet's scarlet red, wearing the same ring I'd imagined on my finger. No ceremony, just stunned gasps and whispered betrayal. My mother fainted. My father shook with outrage. The pastor cried. I walked out before they even said the vows. I left Willow Ridge that night, and also left my heart behind among the vines. 10 years passed. I built a life as a winemaker in France, perfecting blends while nursing a broken heart. I returned only once to settle my late grandmother's affairs, but avoided the estate, the chapel, the stained glass where my isles of dreams were shattered, until 3 weeks before Christmas this year, a notice arrived. The vineyard, Gavin's, and my aunt's estate was up for sale for $1 million. Gavin had vanished. My aunt, now widowed and dilapidated, was desperate. Memories clawed at me of that oak tree, of rain-drenched kisses, of shattered promises. And then I made a decision. I wrote a check for $4 million. I transferred it. I bought the vineyard, not to crush them, but to reclaim my life. That brings me back to this morning, standing at the old vineyard gates with frost under my boots, winter sun glinting on bought signs that read Brenda Louise, proprietor. I inhale the vine-scented air and feel the first trace of peace. This Christmas won't be about betrayal. It will be about revival. But what I do next will be more than just owning land. It'll be about healing wounds that ran too deep to hide behind church pews and wedding veils. The countdown to Christmas Eve has begun. The wrought iron gates creaked open as I stepped onto the gravel drive that led to the estate. 10 years hadn't changed the path much. The stones still crunched beneath my boots, the vineyard still stretched out like a story never finished, and the chapel still stood at the top of the hill like a memory waiting to break. The mansion had aged, but not gracefully. Ivy crawled over the once pristine walls, shutters hung uneven, and though I had expected a chill in the air, I hadn't expected it to come from inside the house. She was waiting for me, and Eleanor, she opened the door herself, wearing the same burgundy shawl she wore the day she replaced me at the altar. Her face had changed, less radiant, more worn, but her eyes still carried that cold assurance. The kind that said, I deserve everything I take. You're really the buyer? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. I'm the owner now, I replied, stepping past her into the marble foyer that used to echo with my laughter. She didn't know how to respond. Maybe she never thought the girl she had betrayed would one day stand taller than her. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was power shifting. I walked into the dining room where I used to set the table every Sunday, where Gavin and I had first kissed when no one was looking, where she had likely seduced him right under my nose. The memories didn't haunt me anymore. They belonged to someone who used to be me. I want everything cleared by Christmas Eve, I said firmly. I'm reclaiming the house before the holiday. Eleanor's lips tightened. You're evicting me? I'm restoring what was stolen, I corrected. And you were never the rightful lady of this estate. She laughed, bitter and brittle. You think buying the house makes you the winner? No, I said, turning back to face her. But I've never cared for trophies, I care for truth. She flinched. She knew what I meant. The truth was this. Gavin didn't leave me for love. He left me because he was manipulated by ambition, by charm, by promises whispered between shadows. Eleanor saw a weak point and struck. And Gavin, the man I once adored, didn't even put up a fight. I spent 10 years thinking I wasn't enough. That maybe I was too quiet, too predictable, too soft. But the truth was I was never the problem. They were. That evening, I explored the estate. Like a stranger in a familiar place, I found my old bedroom still intact, as if frozen in time. My childhood books on the shelf, my music box beside the bed, and on the desk, buried beneath dust and a cracked frame, was the photo of me and Gavin, arms wrapped, smiles wide, lies hidden. I burned it, out in the vineyard. The winter vines curled like sleeping serpents. I touched the soil, the same ground I used to tend with bare hands. I knew how to wake it up, how to speak its language, how to turn loss into harvest. This wasn't just a homecoming. It was a resurrection, and soon the town would know. 3 days later, I sent invitations for a Christmas Eve gathering at the estate, open to all of Willow Ridge. A celebration, I wrote, for those who believed in second chances. It was bold, I knew, and I hoped the town would come. But even if they didn't, the message would be clear. Brenda Louise is no longer the girl left at the altar. She's the woman who owns it now. And Gavin? Oh, he'd be hearing about it soon, because while Eleanor had fallen from grace, Gavin had disappeared entirely. Rumors said he was in debt, ruined, drinking away his shame in some rundown motel near the county line. I had no intention of chasing him, but fate, as always, had its own twisted sense of timing. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a strange stillness, as though the house were holding its breath. Workers came and went, replacing cracked windows, trimming the overgrown hedges, polishing brass that hadn't shined in years. Every corner of the estate felt like it was shedding its past, waking up from the slumber Eleanor and Gavin had put it into. I slept in my childhood room, not because I had to, but because it reminded me who I used to be and how far I'd come. Each night, I walked the halls with a lantern, remembering the silence that used to follow my footsteps. The kind of silence that lets betrayal grow. And then, on the third night, I heard the knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps at the back entrance. Not the front, never the front. Whoever it was didn't want to be seen. I opened the door to find Gavin drenched, disheveled, and looking nothing like the man who once promised me forever. His coat was torn, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands, they shook like a boy who'd lost more than his pride. Brenda, he said hoarsely, you bought it, the estate. I didn't answer. I just let the silence stretch. I didn't come here for money. He added quickly, I needed to see it, to see you. There was a time when that line would have shattered me. Not anymore. What do you want, Gavin? I asked, voice calm, cold. He looked past me into the house, the same house where we'd planned a wedding once. They kicked me out, he whispered. Eleanor, she changed after the wedding. Controlling, cruel, vindictive. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because he finally got a taste of the poison he'd helped serve. She made her choices, I replied, just like you made yours. He stepped closer. I was young. I was stupid. I let her convince me that you didn't have fire, that you'd never own land, that you were too quiet to be someone. I blinked slowly. And now you own everything. He looked down, ashamed. I wanted to say I'm sorry, not because I want anything, but because I never got to say it properly. I leaned against the doorway and studied him, this man who had once made me believe in forever, and then replaced me with my own blood. You didn't come to say sorry, I said. You came to be forgiven. He swallowed hard. But forgiveness doesn't live here anymore, I added. Only memory. And that memory has learned how to thrive without you. Later that night, I found myself staring at the old Christmas tree still stored in the attic. I dusted it off, piece by piece. The star was still intact. I decorated the tree myself alone, quietly, as I had always imagined doing one day. As a wife, I used to think that kind of joy had to be shared to be real. But I was wrong. Some joys are quiet victories, and they taste better than applause. On Christmas Eve morning, the estate was glowing. The town arrived in wagons and sleighs, dressed in red scarves and woolen coats. Children ran through the vineyard laughing, unaware of the bitterness this land once held. Inside, I stood in a green velvet dress at the staircase and welcomed them. Welcome to Willow House, I said aloud, raising a glass. Tonight, this house belongs to every heart that's ever been broken and found a way to beat again. Cheers rang out. Laughter filled the halls. The scent of cinnamon, pine, and redemption danced through the rooms. Eleanor did not attend, but she sent a letter thin and crisp, folded neatly in an envelope I knew was bought out of spite. It read only 5 words. I never thought you'd win. I burned that too. And then, just after midnight, I stood alone in the vineyard beneath the stars, breathing in cold air that no longer felt bitter. Gavin was gone again. Eleanor vanished into silence. But I stood tall, surrounded by everything I'd once been denied. And the best part, I didn't need revenge anymore, because victory, when quiet and complete, is its own kind of justice. Christmas Day came with snowflakes falling in slow motion, as if time itself wanted to savor what was about to unfold. The estate gleamed fresh. Paint, restored glass, fires roaring in the hearts, and the town still buzzed with the talk of the previous night's gathering. I'd expected whispers, sideways glances, perhaps even judgment. What I received instead was something I hadn't felt in years: respect. People who once pitied me now greeted me with warm eyes and firm handshakes. They weren't just celebrating my success, they were silently apologizing for ever doubting I'd rise again. As guests departed with hugs and holiday cheer, I stood at the edge of the grand hallway and watched them go. I thought it was over. I thought the story had reached its perfect ending. But then, my aunt returned. She didn't knock. She never did. She walked in like she still owned the place, heels clicking against the marble floor, her fur coat soaked with melted snow. "Brenda," she said, her voice syrupy with false warmth. "I thought we could talk." I raised an eyebrow. "Talk? Or beg?" Eleanor's lips curled. "I made mistakes. I can admit that. But this house, this estate, it's our legacy." I crossed my arms. "No, it was your prize. Now, it's my purpose." Her eyes flashed. "Gavin's sick. He's in a facility now." Broke, confused. "He asked for you." The room fell silent between us. "Why would he ask for me?" I asked, quietly. "Because," she said with a sigh, "he always loved you. And he knows what he did was unforgivable. Then let him live with that." Eleanor stepped closer. "What do you want, Brenda? Blood? Shame? Do you want me to get on my knees and admit I ruined your life?" I stared at her long and hard before answering. "No," I said softly. "I want you to leave, and never come back. Not to this house, not to this land, not even in memory." Her jaw tightened. "You were always too soft," she said. "Too dreamy. That's why he left you." I leaned in. "No, he left because he thought love was a transaction. You were just the higher bidder." That stunned her. For the first time, Eleanor Harrington had no words, no retort, no defense, just silence. She turned without another word and walked out the same way she had walked into my life, uninvited. And I didn't watch her leave. I simply turned away and closed the door behind her. That night, I lit candles in every window. I sat at the head of the long dining table alone, but not lonely. There were no ghosts in the chairs anymore. Just peace, just power. I poured myself a glass of aged red wine from the vineyard, once named for Eleanor's family, now renamed in mine. Louise Vines. There was poetry in it. The girl who once waited to be chosen had chosen herself, and the woman she became, she didn't need a man, or an apology, or even revenge. She had ownership. She had worth. She had a legacy. The next morning, I received a letter postmarked from a county rehab center. The return name read, Gavin Taylor. I didn't open it, not because I was afraid of what it said, but because I already knew he missed what he gave away, and that, I decided, would be punishment enough. Winter lingered like a guest that didn't want to leave. Snow lay thick on the hills behind the vineyard, and the workers now mine began trimming back the dormant vines in preparation for spring. Owning a vineyard wasn't just a dream anymore. It was labor, real, hard labor, but I loved it. Every cracked hand, every wind-chapped cheek, every morning frost on the fields felt like a blessing earned, not given. I spent most of my time walking the land, watching it breathe again. The roots of these grapes had outlived every petty betrayal, every broken promise. Like me, they'd been cut down before, and like me they had grown back stronger. One cold morning, as I was inspecting the northern slope, Harvey Trent, the estate lawyer, pulled into the gravel path. "Miss Louise," he greeted, stepping out of his car, a brown leather briefcase under his arm. "I didn't expect to find you out here in boots and gloves. This land didn't come with heels." I smiled. "What brings you by?" He cleared his throat and held out a thick envelope. Final transfer documents. Estate taxes have been paid. The vineyard is officially yours free and clear. I opened the papers and felt the weight of it. No debts, no TIs, no ghosts. I also brought something else, he added, more cautiously. He reached into the briefcase again and handed me a smaller envelope sealed with wax. Red wax, Eleanor's seal. What is this? I asked. A clause in your uncle's original will, he explained. It was hidden until the final estate review. Apparently, Eleanor knew about it but never told anyone. I broke the seal and unfolded the note. My hands trembled. To my Brenda, if you're reading this, then the land is finally in the right hands. Your aunt never believed in you, but I did. There's a second cellar, below the southern vines, built during Prohibition. Inside, you'll find the first bottle your grandmother ever sealed. I saved it for you. Merry Christmas, my girl. Love, Uncle Remy. I stood there stunned. A second cellar? Harvey adjusted his scarf. Would you like me to have the workers look into it? No, I said firmly. I'll find it myself. Later. That afternoon, I wandered the southern hills, brushing snow away from old stones until I found what looked like an uneven patch of earth between two frostbitten trees, and then my boot struck something hollow, wood. I dug with my hands until I uncovered a small door, camouflaged with age. I pried it open. The air that came out was cold, dry, and ancient. I climbed down into the hidden cellar, dust swirling like memory. Cobwebs hung from oak beams. And then, in the back corner, resting on a pedestal, a single bottle, wrapped in cloth, labeled in ink almost faded to nothing. Louise 1930 for first press. I cradled the bottle in my hands. My name, my family's legacy, hidden for me, preserved for me, waiting until I had earned the right to hold it. I sat on the floor, back against the stone wall, and cried. Not because I was sad, not because I was angry, but because for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged, not to anyone else, not as someone's fiancé, not as someone's niece. As myself. That evening, I placed the bottle on the mantle of the main hall. It would never be opened, never be sold. It would remain a symbol not of what had been taken from me, but of what I had claimed back. The estate threw its first official wine tasting gala 3 days before New Year's, and everyone came, even the ones who used to snicker behind their gloves. I wore deep burgundy, my hair pulled back, head high, and when the mayor raised a toast to Brenda Louise, the woman who brought Willow Creek back to life, I didn't just smile. I stood taller than I ever had before. Somewhere in the crowd, I thought I saw Gavin, but it turned out to be a reflection in the glass, just a shadow of the past, one I'd already outgrown. A week after the Vineyard Gala, as the new year quietly settled over Willow Creek, I received an envelope marked with thick gold trim and embossed initials I hadn't seen in a decade. G.D. Gavin Taylor. I held the invitation in my hands like it was made of fire. Inside was a formal invitation to the Taylor auction, held every January 15th, an event known across the county for showcasing rare art, antiques, and estate items. I remembered attending it once, as Gavin's guest, long before he ever slipped a ring on my finger, or slid it onto my aunt's instead. The note tucked inside was handwritten. Brenda, if you find it in your heart to attend, I'd like the chance to apologize publicly, if need be. This year's auction includes pieces from the Harrington collection. Perhaps they're better off in your hands now. Gavin. I reread the last line 3 times. He was selling off Eleanor's legacy. The night of the auction was bitterly cold. I arrived alone, wearing a long emerald green coat that used to belong to my mother. Inside the Grand Hotel ballroom, old money mingled with new ambition, sipping champagne and eyeing each other over golden catalogs. Then I saw him, Gavin, a bit older, more tired, thinner in the face, but still the man who once promised me forever and gave it to someone else over wine and whispers. He saw me across the room and offered a small, uncertain smile. I nodded. That was all I could give him. The auction began. Lot by lot, silver trays, heirloom brooches, and oil paintings once hung in my aunt's foyer were sold off like history had a price tag. And then came lot 47, a hand-painted porcelain cradle, c. 1895, Harrington family heirloom. Bidding begins at 10:00. The cradle, the same one Eleanor used to boast about during Christmas dinners. The one she told me I'd never touch because it belonged only to real Harrington women. I raised my paddle. Bidding climbed. $10,000. $15,000. $20,000. ID stopped at $22,000. I held the winning bid. They brought the cradle to me after the auction. I ran my fingers along its smooth edge, the painted vines and tiny gold initials, and I laughed. I had no child, no heir, but I had taken back every inch of what they once used to shame me. After the auction, Gavin approached quietly. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. You invited me to your betrayal once. This was easier. He looked down. I deserve that. I'm not here to punish you, Gavin. I've already moved on. He nodded. I know, but I needed to say it. Then say it. He took a breath. I was a coward. Your aunt. She made things easy. You were always going to challenge me to grow, and I didn't want to grow back then. I looked him square in the eye. And now, I've grown, but too late for you. I didn't answer that. I didn't have to. He held out his hand. Congratulations, Brenda. You've built something unforgettable. I took his hand briefly. Thank you, I said. But I didn't build it to be unforgettable. I built it to never be erased. When I returned home that night, I placed the cradle in the parlor of my estate not to remind me of Eleanor, but to remind me of choice. They chose to cast me out. I chose to come back, not as a ghost, not as a woman begging for closure, but as a woman who had bought the very name they used to hurt her and turned it into something beautiful. After the auction, the wind seemed to shift, not just outside my window, where snow flurried across the vast rows of now sleeping vines, but within Willow Creek itself. People began to whisper again, not about the scandal from 10 years ago, but about the comeback no one saw coming. The girl who was replaced at the altar had returned, not as a cautionary tale, but as a legend. That Sunday, I went back to Ridgeview Vineyard. It was still registered under Eleanor's name, but legally, it was owned by Gavin now. Though he'd sold off several assets after Eleanor's health declined, the land was still untouched, still rich with the soil of betrayal, ambition, and legacy. But it wouldn't be for long. Inside the main house, I wandered the hallway I once ran through as a young girl back when Eleanor was still trying to mold me into the perfect niece. She wanted refinement, but she mistook silence for class. She wanted devotion, but called independence disrespect. I passed the old library. There, I found something that stopped me cold. A photograph, framed in walnut, hanging beside the fireplace. It was me, young, just 17, dressed in a velvet dress Eleanor once gave me for the Christmas gala I was never invited to attend. I remembered that photo day, how I stood stiff and unsure, the other cousins whispering behind my back. But it wasn't just my photo. Beneath the glass frame was a quote, etched in brass. The wild vines grow sweeter with time. I swallowed hard. Had Eleanor remembered me? I made my way outside, where the vineyard workers were tending to the soil in preparation for spring. Among them was Harriet, a kind woman I remembered from my younger days. She'd taught me how to taste grapes by color and age. She looked up and gasped. Miss Brenda? She said, wiping her hands. You're back? I smiled. I am. Harriet hugged me without hesitation. About time. I looked over the vineyard, endless rows of potential, history, and ghosts. I want to buy it, I said simply. The whole thing. Her eyes widened. From Gavin? I nodded. I've already made him the offer. It's only a matter of paperwork now. She beamed. You always were meant to run this place. No, I said quietly. I was meant to transform it. That night, as I sat in my own home surrounded by documents, old letters, and contracts, I did something I never thought I'd do. I pulled out Eleanor's last will and testament. It had a clause I hadn't noticed the first time. One written in fine print, buried under legal jargon and carefully placed signatures. In the event of unforeseen incapacity or death, Ridgeview Vineyard shall pass to the next female heir bearing the Louise bloodline, not Harrington. Louise.me. It was a moment I couldn't quite describe. All those years of being second, of being unseen, and all along, she had left me something. Not out of love, perhaps, but out of respect, or guilt, or maybe both. By week's end, I filed every document, consulted every lawyer, and on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, Ridgeview Vineyard officially became mine. The deed, the house, the vineyard, all mine. And the first thing I did? I renamed it. No more Ridgeview. Now it was called Louise and Vine, and the grand reopening, Christmas Eve. The same date I was meant to be married. The same date I was betrayed. Only now, it would be the day I redefine the story, not with vengeance, but with victory. Christmas Eve arrived with snowfall thick as secrets. It blanketed the hills of Willow Creek, coating the vineyard rose like nature's confetti. Inside the newly christened Louise and Vine, lights glowed soft amber, jazz hummed through the halls, and the scent of spiced cider floated in the air. I didn't send invitations, people just came. The town had been watching my story for years, whispering about how I vanished, and now, murmuring how I rose. Curiosity filled every guest's eyes. They came to see what I'd become. They left in awe of what I'd built. Near the hearth, I saw Mayor Carlton, a longtime friend of Eleanor's, now retired. He raised a glass to me and said, "Didn't think I'd ever walk into this place again. But for you, Brenda, it feels like it was always yours." That touched something deep in me. Because it wasn't just a party. It was a reckoning. The door swung open just after 8. Gavin walked in, Eleanor beside him, frail, propped on her cane, but ever proud. They weren't on the guest list, but I expected them anyway. Eleanor wore fur, red lipstick, and a stare colder than the snow. Gavin looked pale, perhaps from shock. He scanned the room like he'd stepped into someone else's dream, and he had. They walked toward me like ghosts from an old life, haunting their own past. Eleanor's voice cut through the music. "So it's true." "Yes," I said. "You're standing on land you no longer own." Her eyes narrowed. "You always were ungrateful." I smiled. "And you always mistook silence for weakness." Then Gavin stepped forward, looking more haunted than I'd ever seen him. His hair grayer now, his eyes dull. "I read the new deed," he muttered. "You bought it in full." "I did." He hesitated. "Why, Brenda? What do you want from us?" And there it was, the question. The assumption that I'd return for revenge, for chaos, for retribution. But the truth was, I had already taken the most powerful action of all. I built a life they couldn't break. I looked him straight in the eyes. "I don't want anything from you, Gavin," I said. "Not anymore." He blinked. "Then why all this?" I took a deep breath. "Because the girl you left behind doesn't live here anymore. But the woman you underestimated, she owns this entire hill." They left in silence, retreating into the snow like defeated royalty. I didn't watch them go. I turned back to my guests, to my vineyard, to the legacy I'd reclaimed, and then something unexpected happened. An older woman approached me with a small girl in hand no older than 7. She clutched a battered notebook and looked at me with big brown eyes. "This is my granddaughter, Ellie," the woman said. "She wants to be a winemaker when she grows up." The girl held up her notebook. "Can you teach me?" I knelt beside her. "Ellie," I said, smiling softly, "I'll teach you everything I know." That night, I made a vow. Louise and Vine wouldn't just be a business. It would be a refuge for the quiet ones, the discarded, the betrayed, the ones like me who were told to stay silent and small. I would give them everything I never had: room, voice, legacy. Before midnight, I walked out to the balcony and looked across the snowy valley. Beneath the stars, I whispered into the cold air, I came back for myself, and that truth tasted sweeter than any wine. Christmas morning arrived with sunlight cutting through the frost, golden and gentle like forgiveness. But I hadn't come here to forgive, I came to claim. By dawn, the townspeople had read the news. The headline in the Willow Creek Gazette read, "Louise and Vine, once the Harrington legacy, now in new hands," and under it, my name, Brenda Louise, stood boldly, printed in thick black ink like the signature on a deed. The land, the vineyard, the manor, it was all mine now. But what mattered more was something intangible: reputation, presence, power. I sat in the great room where Eleanor used to host her grand Christmas brunches. The fire crackled. My lawyer, Mr. Carlyle, sat across from me with a thick brown folder on the table. Inside was something I'd kept quiet about until now. He opened it gently. "Do you want to move forward?" I nodded. "Then let's finish it." Inside the folder was Eleanor's forged will, the original one Gavin and she had quietly drawn up to cut me out of everything. A will I'd retrieved from her former assistant, Maggie Quinn, in exchange for immunity. Turns out, Maggie had been keeping records for years: voice recordings, signed documents, dates, everything needed to prove that the vineyard's true ownership had been tampered with long before Gavin ever proposed to me. They didn't just betray me, they committed fraud, and now the law knew it. 2. By noon, papers were served. A court order nullified Eleanor's financial control retroactively. Gavin, stripped of his marital shield, stood alone legally and emotionally. Every last asset was frozen pending investigation, and me, I wasn't just the new owner. I was executor of the Harrington estate. By order of the state, that vineyard was only the beginning. But the sweetest moment didn't come in court. It came that afternoon, when I visited the old guest cottage by the East Orchard, the same one I used to sneak into after Eleanor slammed doors in my face. Inside, I found dusty books, an old wine press, and a leather journal tucked under floorboards. It was my mother's. A woman Eleanor once called a mistake. She had written, "One day, Brenda will walk this land, not to belong, but to reign. If they break her, let her rise. If they silence her, let her sing. And if they ever try to erase her, let her write herself into history." And I had. That evening, children ran through the halls of Louise and Vine, laughing, playing, their boots clattering against the wooden floors. Many were orphans or girls from the edge of nowhere. I'd turned the East Wing into a mentorship center for girls in foster care, the same girls Eleanor used to ignore. Now they slept in silk sheets, learned winemaking, and danced in the ballroom. And me? I finally danced too. Then came a knock on the front door. It was Aunt Eleanor's nurse, a kind man named Ben Ashcroft, with gentle eyes and trembling hands. He held out an envelope. "She left this for you," he said, in her final hours. Inside, a note, "Brenda, you were always the one with vision. I just never had the courage to admit it. Merry Christmas." I didn't cry. I just folded it gently and placed it in the fire. Some words are meant to burn. I turned away and poured myself a glass of the 1999 Reserve, the year I was born. The label now read, "Louise and Vine, legacy in every sip." The taste, bold, honest, defiant, just like the woman who had finally returned home. The following Christmas came quietly, blanketed in snow and calm. No headlines, no lawsuits, just the echo of the past retreating like the last leaves of winter. I stood at the edge of the vineyard, boots crunching through the frosted soil, watching rows of dormant vines stretch like pages of an unwritten book. A year ago, I was the forgotten ex-bride-to-be. Now I was Brenda Louise, sole owner of the Harrington estate and matriarch of Louise and Vine, and I'd built something far more enduring than revenge. I built a future. Gavin had left town months ago, humiliated after the fraud was exposed and Eleanor's influence dissolved. His name now floated between foreclosure notices and unpaid debts. I didn't speak to him again. There was nothing left to say, but not all ghosts of the past vanish. One arrived on Christmas morning. It was Aunt Eleanor's sister Martha, who had once warned me to leave the estate quietly. She stepped out of her black sedan, her fur coat braving the cold, her eyes sharper than I remembered. "You turned the ballroom into a library," she muttered, stepping through the manor doors. I smiled. "And the cellar into a classroom. The girls needed a space to grow." She ran her fingers across the grand piano I'd restored. "Eleanor would have hated this." "Then I'm doing something right," I said. Later that afternoon, I hosted a Christmas feast not for elites, but for the girls, vineyard workers, and the families who never made it past the Harrington gates when Eleanor ruled. We sang. We danced. We drank sparkling cider and passed around plates of rosemary bread and roast chicken. The same hall where Eleanor once toasted to bloodlines and old money now echoed with laughter and the sound of opportunity. Before dessert, I stood at the top of the grand staircase and addressed everyone. I spent years believing I had no worth unless someone else told me so. I began. But this past year, I learned something more powerful than wealth or revenge. I learned that being forgotten gives you room to grow roots so deep, even storms can't touch them. They applauded, not because I was rich now, but because I had changed what that estate meant. That night, I walked alone through the vineyard under a canopy of stars. In my pocket, I carried two things: the new deed, naming me permanent trustee of Louise and Vine, a letter I wrote to myself on the day Gavin left me at the altar. I hadn't opened it in 10 years. With trembling hands, I unfolded it by moonlight. It said, "You will survive this. Not because they spared you, but because you are stronger than they ever imagined. Keep walking. One day, you'll return not as a guest, but as the owner." And I had. As the clock struck midnight, bells from the old church in town rang out faintly, "Merry Christmas." But this year, it wasn't about lights or trees or gifts. This year was about reclaiming everything they said I'd never have. Not just the mansion, not just the name, but the power to rewrite the story on my terms. I raised a glass to the stars and whispered, "To the girl who waited, to the woman who returned, and to the legacy they never saw coming. Final questions for the reader. What would you do if your family tried to erase you from your own story? Can revenge ever lead to healing, or is it just another kind of power? Have you ever been underestimated and then surprised everyone? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment if Brenda's story gave you chills.